A new report indicates that Meta Quest 4 and 4S are slated for release in 2026, followed by a Quest Pro 2 in 2027. You could play 2 multiplayer games on the Quest for free this weekend for an hour, and another set of reports says that Meta is cutting its spending in its Reality Labs division by 20%. This is the Live Open Daily podcast. Let's talk about it. I'm your host, Live Open Mike. Live Open Daily comes to you 5 times a week, going through all the news and game information that pretty much I just find interesting. 2 of the stories today originated from the site The Information. It's from 2 reporters, Wayne Ma and Kelly Huang. I probably said those wrong. I apologize if I did. I should point out that I have not actually read these reports because both of these, the information itself is behind a paywall. So I'm going off of the reports from both Upload VR and Road to VR. The first major piece of news is that Meta Quest 4 is supposed to release in 2026 along with the 4S. I always assumed that the Quest 3S was going to be just like a one-off because they realized that the price gap between Quest 2 and Quest 3 was going to be a problem. And the Quest 3S, for those who don't know, is just a slimmed down version of the Quest 3, or probably not even slimmed down version, because it should be fatter. But basically they're going to take out the pancake lenses and all the IP adjustment along with probably a few other small comforts. Like I think the adjustable facial interface is going to go away. They'll just have the glasses spacer from the Quest 2. To get the price point down to somewhere around what the Quest 2 costs, like $300. Personally, I'm not going to buy one of those just because I don't think I can use Fresnel lenses again, but I can see myself giving it to someone as a gift. I talked about that on the previous podcast, but I figured because of the price jump between Quest 2 and Quest 3, this was only going to be a one-off. So it's kind of surprising to hear that the Quest 4S is going to be a thing. We won't know what that looks like until we actually know what the specs of the Quest 4 itself are, but this will be some kind of intermediary gap between what Quest 3 is now and whatever Quest 4 turns out to be. So let's say Quest 4 had eye tracking, for instance. Quest 4S probably would be a Quest 4 without the eye tracking. So they'll make like some compromises to get the price down. Reaction to this has been kind of mixed. Of course, there's some people saying it's way too soon and Meta's price gouging and this is unprecedented in the VR industry, which is not. We'll get to that in a second. And then there are people just wondering and speculating about what a possible Quest 4 is going to look like. Like I said, I think personally will have eye tracking, even though I will die on a hill that Quest 3 should not have had eye tracking. That was a good move. I've talked about that in a previous podcast and in the video on the YouTube channel. You can go back and watch any one of those to kind of get my take on that. But reaction wise, the point that it's too soon I thought was kind of laughable because I think most of those people are coming from, well, PCVR doesn't iterate that much. Really, they're just thinking about Valve. And they're probably thinking about maybe Sony for like the PlayStation VRs 1 and 2, but pretty much every other company in the sector releases headsets at least every few years. Just to run through a list here, let's see, the HTC OG Vive came out in 2016, followed by the Vive Pro in 2018, the Vive Pro I in 2019, the Vive Focus in 2019, the Vive Focus Plus was also 2019, the Vive Cosmos was 2019, the Vive Pro 2 was 2021, the Vive Focus 3 was 2021, the Vive Flow was 2021, and then the Vive XR Elite, their current headset, was 2023. Moved to Pimax, the 4K was 2016, the 5K was 2018, the 5K Super was 2019, the 8K was 2019, the 8KX was 2020, the Pimax Crystal was 2023, and this year, 2024, we're getting the Pimax Crystal Super and Lite. Varro, the Varro VR1 was February 2019. I'm saying the month for a specific reason. The Varro VR2, its successor, was October 2019. That's just 8 months later. 2 months after that, the Varro XR1, that was the first mixed reality headset, hit the market. A year after that, December of 2020, the Varro XR3 and VR3 both hit the market. A year after that was the Varro Aero 2021, and then 2 years later, last year, was the XR4, their current headset. What about Pico? The Pico VR Goblin was 2016, the Neo CV was 2017, the G2 4K was 2019, the Pico Neo 3 was 2021, and a year later was the Pico 4 at 2022. And then of course there's Oculus, which later became Meta. The Rift CV1 was 2016, the Go was 2018, the Rift S was 2019, the Quest 1 was also 2019, the Quest 2 was 2020, Quest Pro 2022, Quest 3 2023. These headset cycles move very, very quickly. So if you're just looking at Valve, which launched the Index in 2019, you might be saying that, well, the Valve stayed on the market this long. And frankly, I don't really disagree with that. But I will argue until I'm blue in the face that if the Valve Deckard had dropped any time since like 2020, 2021 range, every single person that got an Index would have upgraded. Every single one of them. There's been a whole culture built around the copium of like Valve Deckard information. Sadly, Bradley has built pretty much his entire career on data mining as much information as he could about Valve in between all of his other tech work, but that's really what been his bread and butter was Valve information. That's what most people go to him for. And especially when it comes to the standalone market, the Quest 3 was basically dated a month or so after it came out when Qualcomm announced, hey, we've got a brand new Snapdragon XR2 Gen 2. This chip is more powerful than the one we already put out in the Quest 3, and there are already companies saying that they're going to have this new iteration of the chip. Pico said it'll be in the Pico 4S. It's supposed to be immersed. It's supposed to be in the visor. That's a headset from Immerse that's supposed to drop later on this year. The Quest 3 is already going to look dated in like a year or so. This tech in this industry is moving so fast that if you're not putting out new hardware every few years, you're pretty much left behind. Stuff like eye tracking technology was super expensive. It was only like the enterprise level years ago. Now it's coming down to the consumer level in headsets like the PSVR 2, the Apple Vision Pro, even though that's a very expensive headset, but this is something that consumers can buy. We're going to see so much new tech happen in the last few years that's currently in research and development at companies like Meta. Stuff like varifocal displays, maybe like the yield on OLED panels will get to a point where it's actually cheaper to put them in headsets and we won't see LCD panels anymore. Advancements like that are going to come quick, fast, and in a hurry. And even though I don't want to get to a point where we're getting like a new Quest or a new PSVR 2 or a new Pico or a new Valve, whatever they're going to do every single year, I do think you need to change up your technology and put refreshes out there as the market demands it. And as the technology advances to a point where what you have on the market right now is just considered dated. Not everyone can be Nintendo that can sell the Switch for like 7 years and continue to put out like top tier games every single year because their franchise library, their software library is so strong that they can withstand having dated hardware. A lot of older consoles are like that. Stuff like the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, some of the Xboxes, those were around for 11 years, but they had the software support to merit that because they had so many legacy franchises that they continue to just make money on the software. VR is not there yet. You're either subsidizing your headset to get the cost down like Meta and Pico do, or you're selling it at an extremely high price like Apple does and like Somnio is about to do with their VR1 because you need to turn a profit somehow. Because you need to have some kind of path of profitability. And right now, just being straight up, the standalone headsets, even as much as I love my Quest 3, aren't at a point where we can put them on and leave them on all day. There's still a lot of friction involved in that. And most VR enthusiasts will tell you, well, that's not the case. I can wear my headset for 5 or 6 hours every day. Your average person is still spending less than an hour in their headset. You have to continue to iterate and build up the technology to a point where that becomes a non-factor. Moreover, specifically when it comes to standalone gaming, like I talked about before, I have a document of over 100 games that have gotten Quest 3 updates, and the results have been mostly mixed. Now, before the Quest 3 came out, there were people saying that the highest ceiling that Quest 3 had in terms of visual fidelity was going to be like a really low-end PC VR headset, and that's proven to mostly be the case. As great as something like Red Matter 2 looks from the wizards at Vertical Robot, that is still not on the high end of what you could get with PC VR, especially if you want to advance standalone gaming and VR gaming in general. Because Meta is the market leader, you have to put out more powerful hardware to continue to bridge that gap. Now, standalone fidelity is never going to catch up to PC because PCs always outpace even console gaming to this point. So by the time standalone headsets can, let's say, equal a 4090, there's going to be like 6090s and 7090s on the market that are still going to outpace what standalone VR can do. But as long as you're bridging that gap, making better looking games and better looking software, and people are able to stay in headsets longer because you've made advancements in like comfort and eye strain, this is something that really just needs to happen to help adoption. Having said all that, this doesn't mean that Quest 3 support is going to end in 2026, and anyone saying that just kind of needs to look at their history. The first Quest 1, is going to fully lose support next month. That's August 2024. That headset came out in 2019. Its successor came out, the Quest 2, a year later in 2020. We did not get a Quest 2 exclusive game until a full year later. That was Resident Evil 4 from Armature Studio. And most games were maintaining their Quest 1 support well into 2023 and then started to wind it down. So there was a 3-year gap between when the successor came out and when Quest 1 support started winding down. Quest 2 is the best-selling headset of all time. It dropped in 2020. Its successor came out in 2023. I don't think we start seeing Quest 2 game support start winding down until 2025, so that's a 6-year life cycle. And then Meta stops support in probably like 2026, right around the time Quest 4, now that we know about this, comes out. So even with Quest 4 dropping in 2026, I think the same cycle happens. We start seeing Quest 4 exclusives in like mid to late 2027, and then Quest 3 lose support entirely in like 2028, 2029, something like that. And that's still a pretty decent life cycle for a technology that's advancing very quickly. If ByteDance decides they still want to keep pouring money into Pico, all indications are that's probably not the case, but if they continue to do that, I would imagine like we're going to get the Pico 4S this year, about 2 years after the Pico 4 came out. I would imagine they still continue to release headsets around the same cadence every 2 to 3 years, maybe 3 to 4 years, something like that. This is just how this industry has gone across most companies. Valve and Sony are the exception, not the rule. Next story is about the free MetaQuest weekend. We talked about this last week. Meta's doing a 5-week test where they give Quest owners access to 1 hour of 2 select multiplayer games. Last week was Breachers and Racket Club. This week is Dungeons of Eternity and Real VR Fishing. If you're unfamiliar with the program, you're able to download these games pretty much right now as you're listening to this podcast. You can play it for 1 hour and then your demo ends at that point. After you play the game for an hour, you'll get an email in your box saying that you can buy the game for 20% off for a period of about 5 days. Reading straight from the blog about the 2 games, Dungeons of Eternity thrusts you and your friends into randomly generated dungeons with little but a weapon and your wits. Chop your way through enemies with realistic physics-based melee combat or master throwing axes, become an expert with the bow, or fire off powerful spells. Of course, skeletons and other evildoers aren't the only thing to watch out for. You'll also need to avoid traps, solve puzzles, and more. Escape the dungeon and you'll be able to level up and head right back into another. It's an addictive loop that's even better with friends. This is absolutely, that last line is really important. This is absolutely a game that's best with friends. I don't really like this game when I play it by myself, but dungeon diving with friends and like the wacky melee combat, it's just a lot of fun. I say wacky because when you're in there with a couple of friends, all the realistic physics goes out the window. You're just spamming attacks trying to get all these enemies off you as fast as possible. It's a whole lot of fun. The dungeons are mostly randomized, so unless you're grinding the living heck out of the game, you're not going to see every layout for a while. I highly recommend the game, especially if you're looking for something like Legendary Tales. If you're coming from the PCVR world and you're looking for something like that on Quest, it's going to be your best equivalent to that. The other game is Real VR Fishing. Again, reading from the blog. Looking for something relaxing, Real VR Fishing takes you around the world to the best fishing spots, from Grand Teton National Park to Hawaii to Korea. Catch your line, wait for a bite, and see what you reel in. With over 140 unique species to catch and a wide variety of rods, reels, baits, and bobbers, Real VR Fishing is the ultimate fishing simulator and a great way to spend a lazy Sunday. This is the second week of a 5-week sprint that Meta's doing with this. Up until this point, you couldn't do an hour-long trial of a game. There was a try before you buy system. I actually used that to play Power Wash Simulator last night on my Twitch stream, but those are only limited to 15 or 30 minutes. Depending on what game you're playing, sometimes the tutorial itself can take 15 to 30 minutes if you're playing something fairly complicated, or if you're playing the part of the game, if you're playing like a story game where it's just introducing you into the story, into the world, 30 minutes isn't nearly long enough to get a real feel for the game. So honestly, I hope that try before you buy expands to let developers put out their game for an hour, because in a lot of the cases 30 minutes just isn't enough to get you to want to buy the game. I personally already own Dungeons of Eternity, but I've never played Real VR Fishing, so this will be something I'm going to hop into this weekend and see if I want to pick it up or not. The last story comes from The Information. That's the same paywall site that gave us info about the Quest 4 and the Quest 4S. This indicates that Meta is looking to wind down the spending in Reality Labs by 20%. Meta has already gone through multiple rounds of layoffs that impacted places like Reality Labs. There were companies like Downpour Interactive and Ready at Dawn. That's Onward and Echo VR, Lone Echo, for people who don't know what games those companies made. Those teams had their stats reduced pretty drastically. Now reports are that Meta is looking to cut their spending by 20%. For those who don't know, Meta has poured billions, and I mean billions of dollars into Reality Labs. This is actually the virtual reality, mixed reality, augmented reality, and now artificial intelligence research ward, but a lot of that's in research and development into future tech. Mark Zuckerberg has said for years on earnings calls that Reality Labs will not turn a profit until well into the 2030s, but it looks like they're starting to move them onto the path to profitability and taking all that money they've been put into R&D and start putting it into actual products. Meta does have their Llama AI out right now, but most people I know who are into AI says that it pales in comparison to something like ChatGPT. They need to step that up. The Meta Ray-Bans were a massively unexpected hit last year, and Meta seems to be doubling down on that because now they separated Reality Labs into 2 different wings. There's a VR side that does the stuff that we all like, and then there's a side that does Meta Ray-Bans because, again, those are so way better than Meta ever intended. Both Zuckerberg and Andrew Bosworth have talked about that. So the way I read that is that they're looking to get as many products out into the wild, into the market by 2026, so they can shift more of the spending to stuff like marketing, ongoing software development, and upgrades, as opposed to researching what's coming down the line. Reality Labs has already gone through some restructuring with some of the layoffs I talked about earlier. A lot of people that were eliminated, other than the game development studios I talked about, were like middle and senior management positions. As they're acquiring and merging all these companies and bringing them all in-house, you end up with a lot of positions that end up being redundant. You really don't need 2 CEOs if you just bought a company. You have one for Reality Labs who oversees all of that. Then you have the CEO of the company you just picked up. Probably don't need that guy anymore. That's just a harsh reality of the business. That's how a lot of these acquisitions work. My presumption is they continue to lay out those people who are working redundant jobs that are already held by people who are already in Reality Labs. And as they push these new products out to market, their next generation of Quest headsets, the Quest 4, 4S, and the Quest Pro 2, and the next generation of Meta Ray-Bans, they'll start shifting away from doing so much heavy R&D, start doing a lot more dollars into like marketing their software, start getting more companies on board. They're already licensing out the Meta Horizon OS to other companies who are going to build headsets separately so they can start doing more software management and do less hardware. Meta was not a hardware company before it acquired Oculus, and it seems like they kind of morphed into one, but their money wasn't advertising and in software. I feel like Meta's always kind of wanted to get back to that, and starting to source out the Horizon OS seems to be a step in that direction. I don't think they ever get rid of the Quest line. It's way too popular at this point. Same with the Meta Ray-Bans, but maybe they spend less time trying to develop hardware and get back to making software, because Lord knows, I think we can all agree the Meta software on the Quest headsets needs a lot of help. That's a wrap for this episode and for this week of Live Open Daily. You catch Live Open Daily on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and iHeart. And check me out on Twitch. I stream VR there several days a week, twitch.tv/liveopenmic. Thanks, and I'll talk to you on Monday.